Is New York losing its magic for tourists? We'll talk about the shocking rise in crime at a popular tourist spot, jaw-dropping hotel prices, and a growing list of everyday struggles. Is New York still worth the trip? Let's discuss. One indisputable fact about visiting this city in 2024 and going forward is the rising cost of everything, starting with your hotel room. The New York Times just came out with a story about why NYC hotel rooms are so expensive right now. The average daily rate for a hotel stay in New York increased to $301 in 2023. I can only imagine where they're at in 2024, and there's so many factors involved, but the big three that this article cites are migrant shelters, the loss of Airbnb short-term rentals, and the decline in new hotel construction. Let's start with hotels being converted into migrant shelters, which is good business for many hotels. About 135 of the city's roughly 680 hotels entered the shelter program, with many congregated in Midtown Manhattan, Long Island City and Queens, and near Kennedy International Airport, all traditional magnets for tourists. Participating hotels are paid up to $185 a night per room according to the city. Not a single one is converted back into a traditional hotel. The use of city hotels for migrants represents a loss of 16,532 hotel rooms, leaving 121,000 rooms for travelers. That's 2,812 fewer hotel rooms than existed in the period just before the pandemic, a shortage that is being acutely felt. I mean, this is simple supply and demand. Less supply, more demand, prices are definitely going to go up. Since migrants are mostly taking up the city's more affordable hotels, mid-market tourists are most likely to see the steepest increase in prices. I really believe it's enabled 2- and 2.5-star hotels to be a little bit more emboldened to take advantage of the situation and charge prices that perhaps they otherwise wouldn't be able to. Now, it would be unfair to completely blame the migrant crisis for the increase in hotel room prices. There's another factor that's definitely at play, and that's almost the complete ban of Airbnbs for short-term stays in New York. The number of Airbnb listings in New York City for stays under 30 days plummeted by 83% to just 3,705 apartments in March 2024, down from 22,247 in August 2023. Now, according to Mayor Adams, the city is just so popular that, yeah, prices are gonna remain high. In a statement, a spokeswoman for Mr. Adams attributed the rise in hotel rates to the increase in tourism. About 62.2 million people visited the city last year, just below the record of 66.6 million in 2019. The return of tourists to New York City is reflected at hotels as well, where demand is up. New York City is safer, cleaner, and as the numbers show, continues to be one of the most popular destinations in the United States. There's another factor at play that really wasn't touched upon in the article, and that's inflation, which is affecting the entire United States and heck, the entire world. There was 2 articles written recently about Disney. Families are going into debt for Disney vacations. Is a Disney theme park vacation still worth the price? I wanted to see just how bad it was in Times Square to book a room for next month. I went into booking.com and I put a week in late September, the 22nd to 29th, and the cheapest room I found was $383 a night at the Pod Times Square. Now granted, it is a busy time of year to visit, but it's not a peak period. And honestly, I'm not such a fan of booking a hotel stay there, especially if you have a family, because later on in the video, we'll discuss some unsavory quality of life issues that are going on in that area. Now, the guide in me has a few suggestions, one of which is to book as far in advance as possible. Also, play with the dates. Look, we have 3 area airports here. I think it's just as important, if not more important, to get your hotel booked first rather than the flight, because getting a good hotel deal in New York can be pretty tricky. Now, for example, I put 1 week later and I put the hotel in downtown Brooklyn, which is about 30 minutes from Midtown, and I saw a deal for $247 a night. Not super cheap, but cheaper. Of course, the further away from Midtown you go, the cheaper it will get. You can look at Long Island City, Queens, you can look at Flushing, Queens. A lot of other areas of the city will save you money. But it's those hotels in Midtown which just drive up the costs and why it makes New York look just so unaffordable. There's been a lot of negative media coverage about a famous attraction in the city, and that's Central Park and robberies. Let's read this headline. 3 teens in custody, one sought in Central Park mugging as robberies up 200%. A group of teens are in police custody after allegedly mugging 3 people in Central Park. It happened around 1 a.m. Tuesday at Grand Army Plaza at 59th and 5th. The suspects approached the victims with one apparently motioning, simulating they had a gun. They're accused of mugging 3 victims ages 35, 21, and 15 of their AirPods and a chain. Now, arrests were made in this case. 2 of the 3 young suspects arrested in a robbery in Grand Army Plaza in Central Park early Tuesday are residing in city-run migrant shelters, one of them at the Row Hotel. Now, being such an iconic location, you know that the city is going to step up patrols, and the NYPD has a lot of surveillance going on in this area, particularly now between 7 to 11 p.m. Outside of the extra police presence, Mayor Adams said they might even implement drones to increase patrols. Mayor Adams on Tuesday acknowledged the troubling numbers and said they're looking at new technology like drones, and they will roll it out when the time is right. When something happens in Central Park, it becomes a huge international story. We are on top of it, and the commissioner is responding accordingly, Adams said. All right, let's take a big step back. Don't go canceling your Central Park plans just yet. Robberies are up 200% in Central Park this year, with 30 reported versus 10 at this point last year. While robberies are up 200%, that's 30 total robberies versus 10 last year, 20 extra. This park gets 42 million visitors a year, so do some math on that. What I would encourage you to do is not come here after dark, especially if you're a tourist. Be aware of your surroundings and, don't get lulled into a false sense of security just because this park is so beautiful. There's a specific avenue in Midtown right now that is getting all sorts of negative tension due to some quality of life issues, and that's 8th Ave, just a few minutes from Times Square. Let's start with this New York Post article. Midtown Manhattan's 8th Ave corridor plagued by junkies lying at tourists' feet, fighting in the streets. A stretch of Midtown Manhattan has become a strip of despair where smacked-out addicts shoot up, light up, and conk out at the feet of commuters and tourists. I see a lot of things around here, one shop owner told the Post, of the so-called 8th Avenue corridor near Penn Station, where there's a cluster of addiction clinics and homeless shelters. Fights, drugs, oh my God, bad things. The latest stats from the NYPD show the Midtown South Precinct, which stretches from 9th Ave to Lexington, has some of the highest drug arrest numbers in the city, rivaling Harlem and the South Bronx. There have been at least 423 drug-related arrests in the 2 square miles of the Midtown South Precinct so far this year, an increase of roughly 100 busts over the same period last year. Thank you to the NYC Walking Show for letting me use clips from his recent video to illustrate what's going on. And I think that comes as no shock to people that have lived in New York for a long time, or even many tourists who walk the stretch between Port Authority to Penn Station. Look, it's always been grimy there. It's getting worse. I think that the whole country, big cities in the US in general, are having major issues with homelessness right now and mental health. Being prepared for that when you walk that strip is the best thing that I can say. If you see some unsavory behavior going on, don't be afraid to turn around or cross the street. You know how we've talked about rip-off pedicab drivers on the channel? Well, it's far worse than I originally thought. This is from the New York Post. Out-of-control NYC pedicab drivers terrorize tourists, locals, and even sexually assault their own customers. They're like piranhas. Over the past few years, the driver's behavior has grown increasingly lawless, from blasting loud music and charging outrageous prices to brawling with customers and launching cartel-like attacks on competitors. The outlaw antics are reflected in a surge in pedicab-related criminal summonses, with cops issuing 1,493 violations through June 30th, a 51% spike from the 985 written during the same period in 2023. I'm not gonna bore you with the details here. Apparently, there was at least 1 sexual assault. There was also reports of them fighting some customers who didn't want to pay the exorbitant prices, and even fighting some carriage drivers. I am not trying to make a blanket statement that all pedicab drivers are bad, because they are definitely not. There are some great tour guides who have pedicabs. What I'm always encouraging you to do is not to hop blindly into one that is blasting techno music to try to get that tourist experience, because if you want to act like a tourist, they're going to charge you like a tourist. According to this article, up to $25 a minute. So always negotiate a price first, if you want to do a tour with them, remember that. So I actually polled you guys, the audience, and asked, has the negative publicity surrounding New York right now affected your decision to take a trip here? Or if you took a trip here recently, was there anything odd that you saw that you maybe wouldn't come back? Now, the vast majority of you said you would return. Cost is my only prohibitor. I felt 100% safe as a single traveling female with another single female, with my 12-year-old daughter, with my daughter, and another female. I was just in NYC for the weekend, stayed near Penn Station, walked everywhere, took LIRR out to the Mets game, at late night pizza, never once felt unsafe. I've been to NYC many times over the years, including this year. I've walked the streets at all hours of the day and night and never felt unsafe. I am sick to death of a social media and right-wing media fear-mongering based on political agenda. And then this comment touched on something I didn't even think of. The one negative that was unexpected and something I did not experience on my previous 2 trips to NYC is the sheer number of tourists that are seemingly everywhere in New York. For example, we gave up on trying to get the Staten Island ferry because it was so overcrowded. On my last visit, the ferry was only half full. When I took it, it was impossible to move around Times Square. Roosevelt Island tramcar was also swarming with tourists, and those stuck in the middle pretty much saw nothing. I know there's over-tourism in many places in Europe. I believe there's also over-tourism in NYC. I actually want to touch on that. When you visit New York during a peak period, like the summer, that could happen. Partially due to people like me. Also, there's hundreds of short-form influencers on TikTok and Instagram. So basically any free site or cheap site in Manhattan is probably going to be very crowded, so expect that. Then we got some responses, as I expected, about the costs. I just went to NYC end of last month. My main concern, of course, was cost of a trip. I had originally planned a big group trip so we could all split the cost of a hotel room, but only 2 of us ended up going. Even though we stayed in Jersey City, the cost ended up being $900 a person, and that was just for the hotel. For context, I spent a week in Texas doing all of the major cities and spent $900 on all combined hotel rooms. Just booked my 11th trip to NYC. The only thing that's getting worse is costs, but that's everywhere in the world the same. That's the truth. Know coming in that this city is very expensive and start saving as early as possible. No matter what the media says, New York is still extremely popular, and there are droves and droves of tourists coming in and a limited amount of hotel rooms. This was a really good comment. Hi John, I just visited New York City at the end of July and wanted to add my 2 cents. I grew up in Ukraine and I'm currently living in the Middle East. I was visiting New York alone for 4 days until my husband arrived. I was really surprised by the number of homeless people and those with erratic behavior on the streets. I didn't walk alone after 8 p.m., but it was unpleasant to see this. I saw a lady being harassed in the subway by some weird dude once. Nothing happened to me, and thanks to your videos, I stayed out of trouble. All right, I think this is probably one of the biggest shocks of visiting the United States and big cities, the amount of homelessness and issues with mental health that you are likely to see during your trip. If you know this coming in and you expect to see it, I think it's gonna be a lot easier to digest. I don't have the answers to what the city could do to make this better. I wish I did. I think there's a lot of people who are still trying to figure that out and what they can do. The biggest complaint I actually got from recent tourists was the marijuana smell. Relatively local, right over the bridge in Jersey, but I don't like taking my kids into Manhattan anymore because of the constant weed smell in the air. The weed smoke drives me crazy. I've got no problem if people want to use marijuana, but the way that it can be so inconsiderately used in public is a negative for me in NYC. Just spent 6 days in New York, used the subway every day with my family. Occasional crazy, but that's everywhere. Felt safe everywhere. Only thing really stood out was the smell of marijuana everywhere. You gotta be prepared for that. If you're walking through Midtown Manhattan, if you're walking through Washington Square Park, odds are high you're gonna smell marijuana at least once, probably more. Not everyone who watches my channel does want to come to New York right now. Planning a retirement trip to Tokyo and Japan instead of New York. I got bad feedback from a couple of friends who said New York was dirty, overpriced, and felt dangerous. Would still like to visit New York in the future, but not in the next few years. Was booked to visit next February from the UK, have canceled and booked a week in Orlando instead due to the increased crime issues. Felt safe visiting back in 2017 and 2018, but not anymore. It's just too expensive. We visited New York twice last year before Airbnb was outlawed. Now $2,000 will only get you flight tickets, 2 nights at a hotel, and airport transfer. It's just ridiculous. This year we drive to the mountains or the ocean. One weekend is around $500 or less. I think some of the results are skewed in my comments because as a channel that's generally positive about New York, people that want to visit here are going to watch and they're going to be the ones leaving comments. To circle back to the intro, is New York still worth it to visit even with all of these issues? I think if you do your homework, if you come in with your eyes wide open and you know what to expect, then I think you could have a great trip. But if you last visited here before the pandemic, you come back to the city, some things are definitely going to be different. If you use street smarts, common sense, you should have a fine time. But I'll repeat it, New York is not for everybody. But if you love big cities and all that come with it, at least as far as the United States is concerned, New York is impossible to top. Now that you know about issues facing the city's tourists, in this video, we'll share 15 common mistakes to avoid that cost tourists millions of dollars a year. Watch this next.